Welcome. Today we're going to discuss the technique gift and return and some of the more important principles, concepts, rules, theories, strategies, and some important information you should know about this technique. So let's start out with the base attack. If you notice, we're dealing with a handshake, but this brings in our rule that we have in Kenpo. Check up any loose extremities. So why am I bringing that up? Well, because we're not really worried about this attack itself, but rather his follow-up maneuver. So if you notice, the beginning of this technique is fairly odd. But that's only if you're looking at this technique as a standalone technique. So rather, and this is where the important information comes in, look at it as part of a set. In this case, the 4 gift techniques. The idea of the gift techniques is to show you how to deal with this attack with different options. And in this case, particularly how we're dealing with that loose extremity. So now that we got that out of the way, let's actually get into this technique to see how we're actually dealing with it in gift and return. Well, the simplest way to get away from that hand is to zone. In this case, evasion. I just get out of the way. But what's the problem with that? That he can continue to step and follow me, and we're back into a bad position. So even though we evaded and checked off the loose extremity, we didn't really get advantageous. So let's talk about some of the rules and how we can flip the roles. If you notice, we have a rule to establish our base, which we did. We stepped to the side, we zoned, we got our base. But what's the unspoken part of that rule? Well, we want to start taking away their base. So how are we going to do that? Well, that's where this hand comes in. The idea here is to start controlling their zones. So we're going to get the upper hand, which is another rule. We're doing it both physically, by actually getting our hands on top, conceptually, by putting ourselves in an advantageous position. So what do I mean by that? Well, we're going to be striking to the groin, and if you notice, we're controlling their height zone and his dimensions, again, checking off that loose extremity while zoning and evading from that hand. So now he's no longer effectively able to walk around to get to us. But let's talk about something else that we're doing. If you notice what I just did, I used 2 of my hands against one of their hands, which typically is a bad thing to do because they have another hand and it's typically free. So why is this okay? Well, remember, knowing a rule is not as important as understanding the rule and knowing how to apply the rule. So in this case, we're effectively applying the rule because we don't have to worry about that hand. We've already zoned up, so it's okay to use both of our hands. The other way to think about this is we have a rule that says don't touch what you can hit. So rather than just placing his hand there to try to control him while we're doing the pull, I want to think about striking his hand to get his mind off what he's doing and striking to the groin. So we're doing all of that simultaneous while getting our hand closer to where we want it so that we can start getting control of our opponent. So notice where we are. Now we're going to choose to get all the way behind our opponent so we can take advantage of him. Well, notice how long it took me to get there. I did too many steps. So rather than just moving us, we're going to use the concept of moving them and ourselves simultaneous. So what I mean by that is once we're here, we're going to push them and move us. So this effectively gets us to their center line in the rear without having to do the extra maneuvers. So let's reposition real quick so you can see what's happening at the end. So the idea here now is that we're employing the concept of third handing. Usually when we do third handing is when we use another part of our body or an environmental object to control the opponent as if we had a third hand. In this case, the environmental object is our opponent's body. So another way to think about this is that we're creating a lever. And in this case, to keep leverage over our opponent. So we're applying a lock on their elbow using their body by continuing to grab. So this is going to bring us to our final maneuvers. And I'm going to let him go while we discuss this. The idea here is that we're going to do a side kick. Why are we doing a side kick? Well, margin for error. Remember, we want to make a plus or an X. We're also going to be doing what's called cross body check. So we're going to be kicking to the opposite leg rather than straight ahead. Now keep in mind that we're going to be using the open-ended triangle on the back of the knee and the complementary angle to do that side kick. The idea here is that we're not just kicking him to the back of the leg, but rather we're trying to do weapon to target and target to weapon. So I'm doing the weapon to the target, which is my foot to the leg, but then the knee to the floor as the target to the weapon. So the idea is we buckle them down and they fall. So now that we're here, this is where we're going to finish it up by now doing the left knee to the tailbone and getting them to drop. And if you notice, like some of our techniques do, we're left in the middle of a fight. This is for us to decide whether we think they've had enough and we want to disengage, or through position recognition, maybe do something like leap of death, where we can continue our technique, or variations thereof that you might think of. But, like typical, we're just going to cover our technique. So, now that we've discussed some of the rules, principles, concepts, theories, strategies, and information that needed to be discussed, let's actually walk through it fairly slow so you can see it executed. Up. We hope this video helps you understand the American Kenpo system a little bit better. Thank you very much.